What I've really been, what I'm really grappling with right now is the inherent sort of paradox of trying to use the system of our sort of rational conceptual framework to understand itself. And I'm getting both sort of optimistic and pessimistic about that at the same time, in the sense that I feel like the closer I get to sort of really to getting some clarity in what the nature of sort of well, I don't even say the nature of language, but I guess a better sense of what language is and isn't, um, it becomes harder to accept the ideas that I have sort of at face value. Um, yeah, there's a certain level of distrust that I have, of course, for the entire enterprise, and and what I'm really what's ending up happening now is that I'm starting to get this a little bit of this dissociation, between what I think of as sort of the feeling, perceiving, sensory um, process, self, call it what you want, and the thoughts, the sort of linguistic thoughts. And how do I square that? How do I deal with the fact that there isn't? I don't think that there's really fundamentally unity between those. And then what is it? Who's doing the thinking and who's doing the talking? Is really the problem, right? You see, I don't know if you sort of see the paradox there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, and so the only way to approach all of this is to, I mean, here I'm posting all this stuff, right, on Twitter, saying, or I'm trying to write all this stuff out as this big giant paper, and it's obvious to me that the sands are shifting sort of under my feet, even as I'm writing it, um, to some extent, because I have sort of the core foundational facts, like, okay, LLM's language, let's say those are fundamentally the same thing. Um, And that means that language is this ungrounded, self-contained computational system that somehow interacts with the other systems, but I don't know how, and I certainly don't have a real framework for understanding that. Um, and yet, at the same time, I want to be talking about that. I want to be talking about what is. I want to be talking about the nature of things, at some level that I, of course, feel. I feel, right. And it's, again, you get the duality right away, that there is this unshakable sense of unity, in this sort of that when I'm talking about what I see, and when I hear the words, that those are in some sense a unified self. But my conclusions draw me, lead me to say that they're not. So I don't. um yeah, I'm having difficulty as an individual being able to really trust, in my own thoughts, if that makes sense. And
Interesting.
yeah, so and then I just go on my day, and then I just listen to my voice, and I guess one of the weird things about it is that the language model just runs, and you just hear your own thoughts, and you just speak your own thoughts, and they just appear, and just are generated. Just like the LLM, it churns because we've got the prompt, and then it makes sense in some sense, right? But if I take myself seriously, then I feel like there's another perspective through which those words don't really mean what the illusion the illusory sense of meaning, leads me to conclude. Yeah, I don't know. This is obvious. This is a little too, you caught me too much in my.
Oh no, but this is perfect. This is perfect.
Okay. Thank you. To me, to many, I think, I don't want to. Here's one thing I want to be clear about, is that I'm not really clear on things. There's certain things I'm very assertive about, I think, in the way I state them. And those are the things that I think I've sort of really hammered out well. But when people push back in various directions, I take them really seriously, and I take their challenges very seriously because I don't have the implications of all this are obviously deeply unclear. I really truly believe in some fundamental way that we are, as a species, and with my and myself as an individual member of the species, are treading into totally uncharted terrain in thought space, and we don't know what the actual conclusion of this is. It can seem like we're, that there's an obvious um, sort of convergence or reconciliation, I guess you could say, of how things really are. That there's some sort of Hollywood movie ending here where there's an epiphany, and a unity of reality, and like boom, now we know what is. But where I'm at right now is that actually there's something very schizoid about all this, and I have no idea where this ends up. And and not only where it ends up, but like whether there's sort of an inherent self nullification in this way of thinking, and you just get stuck or something like that. And if the thoughts become aware of themselves as thoughts, and the patterns become aware of themselves as
I
fundamentally
mean,
as
in
just
a sense, you could say a mind is a self-aware thought.
yeah. If a mind is a self-aware thought, right? It's so recursive, um, that does that is that sort of an infinite loop of sorts? Like can you do that recursively? Can a thought be aware of itself? Um, what the hell is going on? To
And then
put
it's
it
interesting that you
really
can
blunt.
transfer that to another agent, to another mind, like we're doing right now.
Even crazier on some level, right? What is this conversation? And am I entraining your thoughts to become, in some sense, self-aware? Or is that maybe too
Well, this
grandiose?
sort of gets Gödelian, right? To a
It gets
degree.
very, that is the word that keeps coming to mind. It gets very Gödelian. Um, the thoughts contemplating themselves, the and there's almost a kind of inclination to be like, no, you know what? Words are just words, and they're just doing their thing, and they don't have meaning, and just throw the whole thing to the wind, and so be it. It's just a bunch of sounds, but nobody's buying that either, and I'm certainly not buying that. My holistic self doesn't accept that in any way, right? The meaningfulness of words and this thought process itself, and talking about thoughts, contemplating themselves, uh, it certainly feels, for lack of a better word, um, very real and very meaningful. And I don't think we really have the luxury to be able to say, hey, no, or the liberty. I'm saying not the liberty, the liberty. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I can say that all I like. That hey, it's just this independent autonomous system, and it's not really me, and it's just somehow related to the other thing that is me, which is like feeling and seeing and hearing. Um, but of course, I don't really believe that. I can't. And why not? And because there's something else, it seems like you really are caught in some sort of I don't say Gödelian, but yeah, there is something inherently recursively self-referential about the word I and am, the seeing, and all of that, um, such that when you hear those words, they're not just sounds. It really does feel like the I is the eye, right? The thing that sees, the thing that hears, is somehow contained in that word. And so, I guess if you really, if you want to get down to it, my evolution has been one where I'm like, okay, look, the LLMs are just clearly doing their thing independent of any of the sensorium. They don't have a exception of seeing or hearing. I really strongly suspect they don't have any subjective experience at all. And and therefore it seems like a logical conclusion that language itself really is not this thing that it doesn't actually um, it isn't shared. It isn't a unified whole with the sensory and perceptual. Um, it seems easy to say that, and I kind of have concluded that on some level because there it is. Language runs on its own, and if it does it in an LLM, it's probably doing it in me too. But at the same time, I'm hearing myself say these words, and the words really do seem to refer or relate. So I don't want um, to convey the idea that this is so all neatly packaged. And I'm like, yeah, sure, modular, language is modular, and then there's the sensory. No, it's obvious that there's something much more holistic and unifying going on. That there's a sort of single, I mean, if autoregressive loop kind of thing going on where the sensory perceptual.
All right, where's my vodka?
It's
You gotta
hit
take.
time. I waited. This is like a record for me. And I didn't say autoaggression for I don't know how long we've been going.
It was a little
But
while.
thank you. I'm maturing.
We're proud.
But
We're all proud of you.
but it is sort of a
You've grown
single.
up to stop saying it every single sentence. Now it's every
Yes,
other sentence.
I think at this point, I think once every three sentences should be my max. But speaking of autoregression, so it's obvious that there is actually sort of something unified happening, and this really ties into some of the conversations I've been having recently with folks. Um, it is one brain in some ways, right? It's computationally one brain, and it's one piece of software that's running that has all of these modalities and has all of these sort of sub processes. But when I say the word me and then I'm seeing as me, like it's not, of course, distinct orthogonal parallel streams. This is somehow a single computation in some ways. And that's the thing that I think first of all needs to be articulated. Obviously, that's a lifetime of work to figure out what the hell that is. Like how are these things actually interacting and forming a sort of a single computational loop of sorts, again, with multiple sub computations, but a single computational loop. And then and how do we think about that philosophically? How do we think about that subjectively, phenomenologically? Because I think that's the key. To me, that is, I think, the big, 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 big insight, and it's what I've been talking about on Twitter quite a bit, is that if we could think of this as a single computational loop, it's that it's somehow an integrated linguistic, perceptual, motor, hormonal, uh, whatever. You throw in whatever kind of different substrate or computational substrate. I don't mean like made of different stuff, but just sub-process. That's a better way to put it. You take these sub-processes, but they're all serving somehow a single unified computational goal, let's say, or something like that. Again, these words are all the weak kind of labels that we have for these things, but they're all kind of in some ways unified as a computational of process. I think that's what the unity of consciousness is, and it's why there is this deeply mysterious but somehow fundamental unity to the self, right? Even though we see and hear and process linguistically and move around and do all of these things, and then we have this word I or me. Um, and it isn't just a linguistic trick. There is an I or a me in the sense that there is sort of this unified computational whole. And that's the idea that I'm trying to get at in some of this idea of software versus hardware, that the software, right? We have these different physiological modules and we have these really very radically different computational processes, like vision and audition and language, for example, obviously are radically different things that are happening in the brain. And it's not just like because it's a single brain in the sense that they're not just it's not just single brain in this they share vasculature, they share resources, they share a skull, but rather that these things are somehow working in unity in unison um, towards whatever. I don't want to get towards the same goal, but again, it's almost it's a little too simplistic. But there's this that we can think of these as a single piece of software, a very multifaceted piece of software, and the idea that that I'm focusing on a lot is that I think subjectivity, the sense of self, the sense of inward experience, is a feature of the software, right? Not the hardware. That's this kind of statement I made on Twitter recently, right? That I want to kind of clarify that it's the idea is that it's not, people talk about the neural correlate of consciousness and things like that, and the mind body problem, and how do you get subjectivity from matter. And it's that the brain, the neurons aren't conscious. And it's not that the neurons themselves in this particular organization of matter is what's conscious. It's that there is some sort of computation that the matter is computing. And that's what I call the software. And not just me, I didn't coin that term, but it's what I'm loosely calling software, is sort of this computational process that the physical hardware, the brain, is carrying out, and that software in this case is this kind of unified thing that is in whatever way we want to ultimately specify. Not clear yet exactly, but something like a multimodal autoregressive loop. There, number two. Or is that three? And so that actually gets us somewhere. I feel like it really gets us somewhere um, in getting closer to our intuitions about what the hell it means to be a conscious, subjective self. That there is this unity of computation, unity of the software, and that there is this also recursive aspect of the software, the self-referential, namely autoregression itself is reading itself in. It takes in its outputs as its own inputs. So the brain is consistently carrying out this computation, a recursive computation. What just happened? What has happened previously, and how does that lead to the next generation? That's as far as I've gotten in some sense, in really thinking about the nature of subjectivity, the nature of the unity of consciousness. But like I said, it also gets very confusing because it feels like language in some ways has this independent existence. Not it doesn't feel that way. I'm sorry. It appears from large language models that language has this independent existence. And yet it doesn't feel that way. And I suspect again, it doesn't feel that way because it is all this integrated loop. But large language models can do it without the integrated loop. And so what is going on? That's sort of the best articulation I have right now of sort of the paradox of how language can be both part of this integrated loop whereby the word I and me and all of that and seeing and quality and all of that have the meaning that they do intuitively. It kind of feels like language does what it's supposed to do in relation to the sensory kind of subjective experience. And yet, LLMs do it just fine without any of that. And so that's sort of a brief window into my very confused inner thoughts. And I'm trying to lay out things that I think can be said with some confidence and certainty. But based on the pushback that I get, it's obvious to me that I need to do more work even within the somewhat narrow framework that I've been trying to express these things. These are subtle, challenging ideas that, and as I said, I don't know if you have language for them. No pun intended. It's not even a pun, but you know what I'm saying. Language. I'm speaking about the limitations of language, but using language to do so. Um, but we really are. This is kind of a weird place to be from a from a human standpoint. The linguistic ground that we have always stood on turns out to be I don't shakier or at least very different than I think we thought, and it's exciting and it's terrifying and weird at the same time. So that's where I'm at, Addy. If you want to know what it's like to be me right now, right? What is it like to be Elon Barinholtz in this very moment?
Right.
Uh, that was a little window into my innermost thoughts.
Well, these things are always good to preserve. I always say we're preserving scientific lineage. A lot of very powerful ideas. We put them up. It's like the song with Nico that we got to still put up. But it's we were talking about how when you have something that's public, put on a paper in a journal or whatever, is you're only seeing one kind of side of it. You're not actually seeing the entirety of the history of everything that went into that. And the
Exactly.
devil is in the details, right? And none of this stuff is. I think it's pretty fair to say none of this stuff is truly developed in a vacuum, right? There's always these weird sort of feedback loops and forms of inspiration, micro inspirations all throughout your day, right? This always happens.
Yes.
And especially to people that are just kind of very obsessive about this stuff, right? It just sort of pops up. And I think it's good. It's good that we keep track of this and we have a place to go so that hey, if this thing pops off, 30 years down the line, it's like oh well, oh we can sort of see the primordial soup, so to speak, of all these ideas, like all of the sort of bits and pieces and components and how they all came together in real time, documented on video and audio that you would have never had 100 years ago,
Yeah,
right?
I
Imagine
appreciate
if
it,
we
and
could have had
especially
this
now.
from
Sorry, go ahead.
Feynman, Einstein, von Neumann, any of those kinds of characters, Claude Shannon, any of those kinds of guys. Imagine if we had this kind of history keeping in a sense. So I think, at least in
Yeah,
that way,
and
it's
and I think it's a great point because and I see it more and more in my own kind of my thought trajectories that you have an understanding sometimes along the way, and by the time you've taken that understanding and then built upon it and tried to formulate it, and certainly when you're trying to wrap it up into a form that you can communicate, what you're left with at the end is certainly related to the process, but it's not quite the same. It's not really possible. You're not really able to compress all of it into here's the final version. And by the time you get to that final version, you're like, okay, now it's all in there. And and I agree with you completely, and especially now in an era where storage is cheap, and we have the capacity to go back, not only as people, but we'll have the AI engines and whatever version there'll be in 5 to 10 years that'll be able to go back and look at the thought processes that we've recorded along the way. And I think we end up creating these narratives as if like, oh yeah, it's a neat sort of linear arc. I thought this, then I thought that, and then I concluded this, and I just got to where I am. But in fact, that's probably very far from the reality. And if I were to actually be able to go back into my own head, say 6 months ago or 8 months ago, it feels like, yeah, I was thinking just earlier versions of the same things, but that's probably not the case. And there's probably a lot more richness to the process than we were able and certainly are inclined to include in the way we wrap things up, right? It was like it's like life, right? Like tell me about your life. Oh, well, I was raised here, and then I went to school here, and then I met this person, and I had kids, and like that is and calling that an overgeneralization or a compression is like it's not doing it justice, right? There's so much more to that, and we kind of superimpose.
it's almost like you've reduced the statement down to parts where you can't rederive the whole of it anymore. Like you've
You can't
over reduced.
derive almost any of it anymore. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's and that is the nature of human memory and thought. Um, that we do that, and that's because, well, I could tell a whole story about that, but in practical terms, I think it's great. I think capturing these thought processes is a very good idea. I'm thankful that you're doing it. And I hope you do it for your own thought processes more often, because I don't bug you to say, "Hey, Eddie, it's 9 p.m. Let's get you on camera and just spill out the contents of your mind." You often do that sometimes, sometimes we'll be chatting for a
Yeah,
few
when
hours
we
on the
talk,
phone,
yeah.
but we don't record it, and we should, because I've certainly seen the evolution of your ideas, and similarly, I don't know if you are able to um, to really uh, re sort of recover the history that got you to where you are now. So, I would encourage you to do the same. I'd encourage other people should do this. Especially if you're in a point in your life where you're working things through, things that you think may be of value to you or to others. I think it's a really cool idea to record them and to capture that moment where you're at, even if you're in a state of utter confusion. That may be the best time
That's a
to
good point.
yeah.
Yeah, because it's sort of like you only see the good sides of things. You never really see the bad side or the in between, and those can be
Don't
very,
call it
very
bad. It's
difficult.
like that confusion is the
Right.
process. I would it may
You're
feel
thinking out
bad.
loud.
What, sorry? Yes, think
It's
out
like
loud.
you're getting all the parts of you're thinking out loud. You're getting all the parts, all the good and bad, everything in the middle,
Right,
everything.
right. And if we respect that process itself is sort of what thought is, then it may not only be about the end point, right?
I
It
mean, it's
may
just interesting that we can externalize these sort of weird, intricate things that are happening inside of our brains and inside of our minds
it's wild.
through these sensory mediums, through audio and vision and olfaction and all this concept. It's very crazy.